I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, June 24th, 2021. The time is 12:57 in the afternoon, and we are conducting this hearing virtually, live via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform and the Chairman's website, which is www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. This hearing also is being recorded and will be on the Council's website in a matter of hours or days, and that's www.dccouncil.us. The subject of this hearing is consideration of 4 nominees the mayor submitted to the council for appointment to the Historic Preservation Review Board. At the conclusion of this hearing, when this hearing is adjourned, I will then take up a 3rd hearing concerning the placement of a statue in front of the African American Civil War Museum. But back to this hearing. So this hearing is on 4 resolutions, 4 nominations by the mayor. PR 24-225, the Historic Preservation Review Board, Carissa Stanley Confirmation Resolution of 2021. PR 24-226, the Historic Preservation Review Board, and Alexandra Jones Confirmation Resolution of 2021. PR 24-227, Historic Preservation Review Board, Andrew Auerbach Confirmation Resolution of 2021. And PR 24-228, the Historic Preservation Review Board, Gretchen Failer Confirmation Resolution of 2021. These resolutions were submitted or introduced on behalf of the mayor and the council on May 11th of this year. If the council does not act by October 1st on these nominations, they will be deemed disapproved. The stated purpose of these resolutions, as I indicated before, are to confirm the nominations for appointment of Dr. Carissa Stanley as a public member. She would be a new member of the board. The reappointment of Alexandra Jones as an archaeologist member, the reappointment of Andrew Auerbach as a historian member, and the reappointment of Gretchen Failer as an architectural historian member. The Historic Preservation Review Board is the official body of advisors appointed by the mayor to guide the government and the public on the preservation of historic buildings and property in the District of Columbia. The board also assists with the implementation of federal preservation programs and the review of federal projects in the district. The purpose of this hearing is to provide an opportunity to the public and the nominees for us to hear as to the fitness of these nominees for service on the board. The record in this matter will close at 5 p.m. on July 8th, 2021. That enables us to consider these resolutions at the council's July 13th legislative meeting. I can't promise that will happen because we're in the midst of the budget, but we will try. We have one non-nominee as a witness, and I would like her to testify first. Rebecca Miller, who's the Executive Director of the Historic Preservation League. I forgot the name of your organization for a second, hot second.
We're only 50 years old, so.
Yes, well, you used to be Don't Tear It Down. I can remember that.
Well, we've now been DCPLs longer than we were. Don't Tear It Down, but either name is fine. So thank you so much, Chairman Mendelson. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the DC Preservation League. For 50 years, DCPL staff, dedicated volunteers, and membership have dedicated themselves to preserving and protecting our city's irreplaceable historic resources. I'm pleased to be here today and thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony. DC's historic preservation law, which DCPL's predecessor, Don't Tear It Down, authored, is one of the most robust and most successful ordinance of its kind in the country. The HPRB members' mandate under the Historic Landmark and Historic District Protection Act of 1978 is to implement and maintain the act on behalf of the mayor through the designation of historic landmarks and districts and the review of development projects affecting protected properties. 2 sets of regulations govern the makeup of the HPRB. one at the federal level, mandating specific professional qualifications be represented to allow participation in the National Register programs and qualify for federal grant money, and the other at the city level, requiring representation of the composition of the adult population of the District of Columbia concerning race, sex, geographic distribution, and other demographic characteristics to be met with members who only need to have demonstrated interest in historic preservation. DCPL had the opportunity to meet with the mayor's newest appointee, Carissa Stanley, regarding her interest in serving as a member of the HPRB. Ms. Stanley is a Ward 5 resident who discussed her background and passion for our city's history and her desire to ensure that preservation is equitable across the district. She acknowledged her unfamiliarity with the preservation law, but has received information from HPRB Chair Marnie Keith and HPO staff and is confident in her ability to apply the regulations as charged. We have no objection to Ms. Stanley's appointment. Dr. Jones also lives in Ward 5 and Ms. Baylor lives in Ward 6 and represent two required professional positions, architectural history and archaeology. Mr. Auerbach's is in Ward 3 appointment as a historian is redundant and at this professional position, and ward residency is otherwise represented on the board. Only one of each is required for these professional positions and is necessary to meet the National Register program requirements. Given that this will be Mr. Auerbach's 5th appointment to the HPRB, the mayor and the council should consider whether this seat might be better served to diversify the board further and allow other interested citizens to shape our city's character. As DCPL noted at the 2020 HPRB nomination hearing, no board members reside in Ward 1 that has 3,500 contributing buildings. That's nearly 9% of the protected buildings in the city, or Ward 7 that has more than 500 contributing buildings. Geographic diversity is vital for communities to feel that their views are considered when decisions are made about their properties or neighborhoods. I thank you for the opportunity to present our comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have of me or the committee members may have. I would like to note that I have one more minute, so I'm just going to be brief. One issue that we have been having during the pandemic is the use of the WebEx platform that most of the DC government uses. You all use Zoom, which has been great. The issue is that the board members are not on camera when the hearings are taking place, which is very unfortunate. They are conducting the public business in a public forum, and you cannot see whether or not the board members are paying attention to you, what their reaction is to what you're telling them with regards to these presentations. Preservation is such a huge business in this town that I think it's unfortunate that we are not able to see what the reactions of these board members are, and they should be required to have a public presence on these web platforms. So with that, I will conclude my testimony and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. And you know, I raised that question at the Office of Planning Budget hearing. You're not saying that the board members aren't present. You're just saying that they're not visible.
They're not visible. So well, I mean, we don't know if they're sitting at their computer and looking at your presentation because we can't see them. So they could very well be wandering around town. I would like to think, I have respect for all of them. I assume that they are paying attention, but I also have 18 years of experience with the board as opposed to those who may be presenting as a new presenter to the board. But I think it's unfortunate you can't engage with them or see who is in fact making decisions on your project or proposal.
Sure, and I think it's also important that visual cues are a major part of communication. So, and you said you can't see what their reactions are, whether they're being quizzical as you're saying something, and that puts you, that is whoever is presenting, at a disadvantage, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes, correct. And also when you have this opportunity, you can see that somebody's trying to say something to you as opposed to people trying to talk over one another. We just had a hearing that we just got off of where the question was asked as to basically our motive for the timing of a filing, which, you know, our response was not acceptable to the HPRB members, which is fine. They didn't need to accept it, but it's to be able to respond to it in an adequate way. And the chairwoman has been doing a great job of managing this, but I think it's helpful when you're in a hearing to be able to see the cues that are taking place of the people who are making the decisions on behalf of your project that you spent so much time putting together.
And you mentioned the chair. The chair right now is?
Marnie Keith.
That's what I thought. And she would be replaced by Carissa Stanley.
That's not my understanding. Is Ms. Stanley being put forward as chair?
No, but being replaced as a member. Now,
So Ms. Heath, I believe that last year, she was recategorized to an architect position. And Ms. Stanley will be taking the citizen position.
so that's something that we need to clarify in the record. The resolution states, I have it right in front of me. For appointment as a public member of the Historic Preservation Review Board, replacing Marnique Heath. So you're saying that Ms. Heath is occupying a different position now?
Correct. She's occupying an architect position.
Okay. In the past, when you've testified, you've expressed concern that some members have raised arguments or questions at meetings that were inconsistent with what the Historic Preservation Review Law requires.
Yes.
You're not bringing that up today. Is that an issue that's largely dissipated?
I think it still happens on occasion, not as frequently as in previous years. There are still questions that are outside of the what is something before you, such as a filing of a landmark nomination. The question is whether or not something meets the criteria or doesn't, not what's your motive for filing this, which makes it seem like we're doing something to get at some developer or something like that. When in fact, we're a small organization, as you know. We prepare nominations that are prepared by volunteers. We have a backlog of nominations that we do, and it's based on volunteer time. So those are not necessarily questions that are relevant to whether or not something is historic or not. So in that capacity, and also during hearings, the previous hearing that we just had, for instance, there was a lot of question about the structural integrity of a building. Well, that's not the question at hand. The question is whether or not the buildings are historic or not, so and meet the designation criteria. And I think that continued training and continued by the staff and by the National Register is important so that everybody understands what their mandate is under the law.
So the issue before the Historic Preservation Review Board always is whether a proposal to designate a landmark or a district meets the criteria that are set forth in the law.
Just under for landmark designation or for historic district designation. If they're reviewing a project, there's all kinds of other things that go into that, obviously.
Such as whether it's compatible with the district or compatible with the landmark.
Correct.
Respects the integrity of the landmark or of the district.
Correct.
So something, now I'm thinking, I'm going back to designations again, that while we want public boards and commissions to be mindful of public sentiment isn't actually one of the criteria for designation in the law. Am I remembering that correctly?
Correct. However, they are required to take the ANC law, as I understand it, is that they are required to take into consideration the ANC's position as great weight. However, on a number of occasions, ANCs will present information that is outside the realm of the designation criteria.
Yeah. Well, actually, the law there is that the agency, in this case, the board, has to consider with particularity the written rationale and recommendations of the commission. So it has to discuss them, and if they're outside the criteria, then it's not bound to do what the commission suggests. And even if they were consistent with the criteria, the ANC makes recommendations. They have to be considered. They don't have to be followed. Give me just a moment here. I do not have any other questions for you. Thank you, Ms. Miller. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for your time. Have a great afternoon.
You too. So let me call the nominees. Carissa Carissa Stanley, my notes here say Carissa Stanley Beatty. Alexander Jones, Andrew Auerbach, and Gretchen Failer. So, Ms. Stanley, I'm meeting you for the first time. I think the resolution just says Carissa Stanley. Oh, what is it?
My technical name is Carissa Stanley Beatty. I actually got married in April.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So should we correct the resolution accordingly?
We probably should, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, that's the kind of thing we do. We're not allowed to make very many changes to these resolutions. That gets into something sort of irrelevant to this hearing, but we probably can fix a name.
Perfect.
So let me see, I actually have you as testifying first. Are all the nominees here? 1, 2, 3. Yes. Why don't you begin, Ms. Beatty, and then after the 4 of you testify, I'll have questions.
Sure. Well, thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members of the Council of the District of Columbia. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify today in support of my nomination by Mayor Bowser to serve as a public member of the District of Columbia's Historic Preservation Review Board. As you mentioned, my name is Carissa Stanley Beatty. I was born in Washington, D.C., and like many others, I choose to live, work, and raise a family here because of the richness of the district's history, culture, and its communities. After graduating from college in North Carolina, I knew I wanted to return home to serve my community and build a career in banking and finance. For nearly 20 years, I've had the privilege of serving district residents, local businesses, private and public interests via financial investments in rental housing and homeownership. My career has included private finance and a 5-year tenure at the DC Housing Finance Agency, where I served the district and built one of the agency's most successful homeownership purchase programs, DC Open Doors. My time at DC Housing Finance Agency is some of my proudest work. More recently, though, my pride has been centered on my family, as my husband and I raise our young son here in the district where I was born. We are residents of Ward 5's Brooklyn neighborhood, where I have lived for 10 years. My commitment to service is a core component of my position as First Vice President of Amalgamated Bank, where I lead our commercial real estate lending efforts in the Washington, D.C. region. I've been with the bank since 2014 and have almost exclusively focused the bank's efforts of financing local affordable housing for D.C. residents. I also serve our community as president of the African American Real Estate Professionals of Washington, D.C. That is a nonprofit organization dedicated to facilitating economic parity through real estate. Additionally, as a board member and audit committee member of the Center for Law and Social Policy, a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization with the mission of reducing poverty, promoting economic security, and advancing racial equity, I continue to advocate for work that leads to the strengthening of communities just like the District of Columbia. History is often a controversial word for Black Americans and marginalized communities because we typically lack the power and influence to lift our full stories. For example, as many across the nation were honoring the memory and service of our veterans, just this past Memorial Day, the television and news websites highlighted the story of an American Legion's decision to mute the microphone of its speaker, Army Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Kempter, because he included remarks acknowledging the founding historical relationship between Decoration Day, started by African Americans after the Civil War to honor those who fought for this nation, and Memorial Day. Closer to home for me even, my alma mater state college system, the University of North Carolina, finds itself in the headlines as a result of its Board of Trustees' decision to deny the tenure appointment of Miss Nicole Hannah-Jones because of her Pulitzer Prize-winning work, The 1619 Project, which tells stories that place the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the center of our nation's historic narrative. These examples are recent, and they illustrate why the Historic Preservation Review Board's work is so very important. The board is charged with designating, preserving, and protecting some of our district's most important historical and cultural treasures, and the weight of that responsibility cannot be overstated. Webster's dictionary defines historic as famous or important in history and having great and lasting importance. And it defines preservation as the activity or process of keeping something valued alive, intact, or free from damage and decay. I turn a lens towards these definitions because it is critical to understand that whether any event or something or someone is noted as famous, important, or valued, and thus should be kept alive, intact, and free from damage and decay, actually has to be determined by society. To be true to American society, those determinations must be made from an inclusive vantage point that recognizes, honors, and preserves the contributions of marginalized communities by ascribing them the significance they so richly deserve. We have a collective responsibility to study, understand, and preserve all of America's history, not just as a record of the past, but as a pervasive thread of truth that serves as the foundation for present-day institutions, systems, and yes, even the inequities. Inclusive representation in historic preservation is critical because it ensures that both our brightest successes and our darkest atrocities are remembered and highlighted so that we and future generations can learn from the true human spirit. More specifically and locally, this includes recognizing the influences and significant contributions of Native and generational Washingtonians to our district's culture and identity. I am humbled to be nominated to serve as a public member of the Historic Preservation Review Board. Should my nomination be confirmed, I pledge to work with my fellow members of the board, the administration, members of this council, and my fellow residents of the District of Columbia to ensure that our district's living identity recognizes and builds upon a solid, inclusive, and honest story of the places, people, events, and artifacts that have shaped this district's past. I pledge to commit the time and the effort to review each proposal, each concept and scope of work, and evaluate it in light of the 4 standards and existing guidelines as defined by the Secretary of the Interior, ensuring compatibility and uniform treatment. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to testify, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Beatty. Ms. Jones. Alexandra Jones.
Yes, hi, this is Dr. Jones.
Why don't you proceed, and good
Can you hear
afternoon.
me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good afternoon. Okay. All right. So good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, members of the staff, and of the committee as a whole. I'm Dr. Alexandra Jones, a Ward 5 resident, and I want to thank you for allowing me to testify here today. I would also like to thank Mayor Bowser for reappointing me to serve on the Historic Preservation Review Board. I am a native Washingtonian. I attended St. John's College High School and Howard University, where I obtained my first 3 degrees. I continued my education at the University of California, Berkeley for my second master's and PhD in anthropology, specializing in archaeology. I returned home to DC and founded a nonprofit organization called Archaeology in the Community with the desire to teach students in the DMV area about archaeology. I have over 18 years of experience as an educator. I've taught in multiple educational environments, from the DCPS as a substitute teacher to museums like the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture, and the African American Civil War located here in DC. Colleges such as Howard University, University of California, Berkeley, Baltimore City Community College, and digital platforms such as the ones that Archaeology in the Communities, DIG, video series are just a few of the programs that I've worked with. I worked for PBS's television show, Time Team America, as an archaeology field school director, where I directed field schools for junior high school and high school students during the 2013 series. Currently, I am a professor at Goucher College and an adjunct professor at the University of Baltimore. As an archaeologist, I am a registered professional archaeologist, and I've conducted excavations in numerous places focused on African diasporic archaeology, including several sites in Maryland, Jamaica, currently in St. Croix and the US Virgin Islands. In addition to that, I do have experience working with pre-contact sites. I'm currently actually working at a site in St. Croix now. I currently serve on the board of directors for the Society of Black Archaeologists. The organization's mission is to promote academic excellence, social responsibility by creating a space for Black archaeologists and other scholars who support SBA's goals and activities. In addition, I serve on the advisory board for the Josiah Henson Museum and Park in Montgomery County, Maryland, and the editorial board for the Journal of Community Archaeology and Heritage. I'm also a member of a number of professional archaeology organizations, such as the Archaeological Society of Maryland, the St. Croix Archaeological Society, the Society of Historical Archaeology, ASOAR, and the Archaeological Institute of America, of which I serve on their board as well as an academic trustee. As a native Washingtonian, it has been an honor to serve on the Historic Preservation Review Board for the past few months. It has truly been rewarding to serve the city, which has given so much to me and shaped me into the person I am today. And I would like to thank the mayor for the renomination and for the members of the council for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Auerbach.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson. It's my honor to come before the committee today, the Committee of the Whole, in support of my renomination as a historian member to the District of Columbia Historic Preservation Review Board. I'm grateful to Mayor Bowser for entrusting me with this opportunity. Since 2007, I have had the privilege to serve the district in this capacity and have witnessed firsthand some of the most exciting adaptive reuse and new developments in our time. Professionally, I'm a communications consultant with a 25-year record of providing clients in the public and private sector with a variety of services. My early career focused on documentary and public affairs video productions, and I helped produce a number of award-winning historical pieces on such figures as Vincent van Gogh, Hap Arnold, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and Hector Berlioz. My practice has evolved with technology to include interactive platforms and social media. I've received many peer awards for my documentary and video work. As you know, I was invited to join the Cleveland Park Historical Society Board in 2000, where I served two terms for that Ward 3 organization. My CPHS board term was winding down when Mayor Fenty was elected, and he nominated me to the board, and my service to both the CPHS and HPRB stoked a deepening interest in the district and the relationship between the environment and the history of the structures that surround us. This led me back to school to Catholic University, where I earned a master's degree in city and regional planning with a focus on sustainability. Soon after, I was reappointed to the board. I've used what I've learned pursuing the master's degree as part of a foundational approach to bringing sustainability to underserved communities in the district and throughout the region. It has been a meaningful and humbling experience to make the direct connections between my studies, interests, and love of the district and its many communities to help people in a significant manner. Community engagement and volunteerism are central to my life, and I have dedicated my time and efforts to a number of different organizations and causes, from coaching youth sports to surfing on a variety of boards. In 2015, I worked with a small group of community members to found and launch the Tenleytown Main Street, which is funded in part by the city. The Main Street program is deeply intertwined with preservation as it is an initiative of the National Trust. The concept of historic preservation as both an urban planning tool and an act of sustainability is core to why I'm such a supporter of the preservation movement. However, the challenges today are very different from those of 35 years ago. In a time of a city declining in population, preservation was a tool that helped stabilize the physical and cultural environment. With a growing population, the role of preservation is different. How we respond, particularly in the areas of housing affordability and environmental sustainability, will set a standard for the next generation, not only in Washington, D.C., but throughout the country as we serve as a national model. During my tenure on the board, we have witnessed significant progress in community engagement through the digital platforms and through institutionalization of the notification process, both to the ANCs and the broader community, which is in large part due in large part to the fantastic Historic Preservation Office staff. And one positive of the COVID emergency was the utilization of online platforms, like the one we're using today to host our monthly board meetings, hopefully making it easier for the public to participate. I hope the district is examining how to continue to use these platforms once the emergency is passed. While on the board, an ad hoc task force came together to examine the preservation guidelines through the lens of sustainability. This effort took over 10 years and involved stakeholders from various agencies, including the Department of Energy and the Environment, DCRA, and others. The new guidelines that were created out of that effort were adopted in January 2020. And it was really a heavy lift by both the staff and the board members. And I think all involved should be commended for that work. In addition to the Sustainability Task Force, certain board members are also concerned about the role of preservation, the role that preservation plays as the city tries to address the affordable housing crisis. Yet I continue to embrace, and so this is something that we're going to try to look at. There are constraints within the law, which we follow, but it is an issue and one that we should all be following very closely. So I look forward to continuing to play a role on the board, providing advice to the mayor on new development proposals, adaptive reuse proposals, and renovation in the historic structures around the district. It's an honor to receive this reappointment and serve the city I love. I stand by ready to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Auerbach. And Ms. Failer. Good afternoon. You are muted.
I should be unmuted, yes?
Yes.
Oh, good. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and council members, staff, and public that might be attending virtually. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself today. My name is Gretchen Thaler. I am a partner and preservation architect at Beyer Blinder Bell, an architecture firm here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. I am a current board member as an architectural historian on the D.C. Historic Preservation Review Board, and I'm honored to be considered for reappointment to the HPRB and to continue to serve the mayor, the district, and its residents. Since its founding in the 1790s, Washington, D.C. has evolved, reflecting the significance of its citizens, social, and political activities, and its achievements through varied architectural and landscape lenses, including those of vernacular, local, regional, national, and international significance. It's been my privilege to work on projects within these types of frameworks throughout the 30 years of my career in preservation, restoration, renovation, and on historic buildings and landscapes domestically and abroad. My professional qualifications and work experience exceed the minimum requirements of the Secretary of Interior Standards and Guidelines professional qualification standards for architecture and historic architecture. My practiced experience with existing buildings provides a solid understanding of the issues of preservation, project delivery methods, technical building documentation and assessments, integration of sustainable solutions and building material treatments, preservation laws, and review processes and regulations applied to historic preservation work. I have practiced, lectured, and published extensively on historic preservation and sustainability. My work has been recognized with more than 27 national, regional, state, and local preservation awards. I'm an active member of the American Institute of Architects, the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Association for State and Local History, and an inductee of Lambda Alpha International. I have served on preservation and zoning commissions in other cities, and I have experience in developing legislation for historic districts to be integrated into existing zoning codes. I am past president of the Association for Preservation Technology, a cross-disciplinary international organization dedicated to promoting the best technology for conserving historic structures and their settings. My fundamental philosophy about historic preservation is that it provides a critical balance of recognition of the past while encouraging future development and viability. I have approached my public service and private practice with an informed and inclusive process that meets the cultural and economic needs of all. I'm familiar with the district's preservation law, regulations, and guidelines. I'm dedicated to balancing historical significance with viable, sustainable, maintainable solutions, providing continued stewardship of our heritage. In 2001, I intentionally relocated to practice preservation architecture in DC because of the dedication, understanding, and participation in historic preservation in this region. I've lived and worked in several communities in the district, and I currently own a home in Capitol Hill Historic District. Over the last decades, some of my projects in the district include the WMATA Northern Bus Garage restoration, the old post office, the Carter Woodson House, the Planet Word Museum, the Carnegie Library, the President Lincoln Memorial Home, Decatur House, Eastern Market, the Washington Monument Visitor Center, the Washington Union Station Master Redevelopment Plan, many other projects at the Architecture Capitol Campus, the National Gallery of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, and private projects on DC's waterfront in the Anacostia, Capitol Hill, Georgetown, Pennsylvania Avenue, and Mount Pleasant historic districts. In 2010, I became involved with the HPRB as a volunteer on the Sustainability Subcommittee to update several of the preservation guidelines for the district. Through that effort, I was fortunate to be nominated and appointed to the HPRB in 2011. Serving as the chair for 4 years and continuing on again as a board member since 2016, I've worked diligently and successfully through our preservation laws to develop and build consensus-built solutions on large and small scale significant projects that both preserve our heritage resources and enable development within our communities. I've continued to work on issues of sustainability, viability, and affordability within the parameters of our public process. I initiated and sought out agency funding for solutions to integrate preservation guidelines with sustainability. I made numerous public presentations to preservation, legal, and development-based organizations on the function of the Historic Preservation Review Board and issues related to historic preservation. I'm looking forward in anticipation of continued service on the DC HPRB. I really have 3 areas of focus. The first is continuing to focus on sustainability and preservation. I'm committed to working with DOEE, DCRA, and OP on implementing the sustainability guidelines of existing and historic properties that the staff at HPO has developed with an outside consultant. That will integrate sustainable design initiatives into our preservation guidelines and then serve to inform and establish specific guidelines for individual historic districts. Working on the functions of the board in supporting the chair, I will continue to ensure that the public has the opportunity to be heard on issues related to the board's purview at HPRB meetings. I will continue to work with my fellow board members on consistency and clarity of decisions from the HPRB. And I'll continue to continue with the recent modifications as supporting the chair on how the HPRB recognizes and integrates the great weight afforded by the ANC. This was something the board had always considered in the past. However, in recent changes, we've been extra diligent in being more overt about that communication and recognition and consideration. I will continue to work alongside the excellent staff at HPO with the community to inform them about the HPRB process. Lastly, preservation, affordability, and density. I'll continue to work with HPO to find opportunities to develop guidelines and resources for residents, as there have been a significant number of projects that relate to affordable living before the HPRB. This includes consideration for ways to assist existing residents in single and multifamily homes in finding ways to maintain and stay in their homes and communities. I believe my experiences, expertise, and approach to practice contributes significant value to the district's historic preservation review process. And if reconfirmed, I will use my knowledge to the best of my abilities to serve the District of Columbia. Thank you again for the opportunity to be considered to serve the mayor, the district, and I am glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. I don't know if I noted this before, but Ms. Jones, Mr. Auerbach, and Ms. Taylor, each of you are reappointments, proposed for reappointments. Maybe I'll start with this. Since 3 of you are reappointments, you have some sense of how much time is required to serve on the board Ms. Failer, could you just describe that briefly? How much time?
Sure, I'm glad to. We have consistently both had our regular meeting and overflow meeting, so it's typically 2 meetings a month. In advance of that, we receive the agenda and the packets of materials. It requires the time to go and visit each of the sites on the agenda in advance of those meetings, review the materials, and if there is additional backup material, make sure to ask staff of those questions. So there's time to review all those things in advance, and then participation during the meetings. It's not uncommon lately also with more complex projects that you might be asked to participate in less than a quorum of the board working with staff to provide additional clarity to applicants if they're in a phased or complicated project, to help them have some clarity on the comments from the board and how they might move next for approval. So it's a good amount of time, but those are the main categories of types of activities that we're involved in.
So how long does a board meeting last? And I also should note that I think the 3 of you who are on the board, I guess the board is recessed right now so that you all can participate in this hearing. So I want to thank the board for that. How long does a
Thank you.
meeting last?
The board member, we usually have an executive session that starts at 8:30 or 9, and the meetings run until about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So it's a full day.
And then preparation would be maybe the better part of a day?
Yeah, it would take a Saturday afternoon and a Sunday afternoon.
Okay. So all that was to set up this question. And I'll ask each of you, Ms. Failer, do you have the time to serve on the board when you're reappointed?
I absolutely do.
And Mr. Arbach, do you have the time?
Yes, this has been routine. One note that I would add, on occasion, there may also be site visits with staff and applicants to either complicated projects or to be on site to catch some nuance that may not be as apparent in a staff report or an application. But yes, I absolutely prioritize and make the time available for participation in the board.
Dr. Jones, do you have time?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm the newer of the appointees. So having gone through it for the past 3-4 months now, I'm quite accustomed to the time commitment.
All right, and Ms. Beatty.
I do have the time, Chairman, and I'm honest with myself. As the newest appointee, I realize that it may take me more time than some of the other folks that are more tenured, and I have the time and look forward to it.
Great. And my second question, which may have been in the pre-hearing questions I sent to each of you, and that is, are you current in your taxes and obligations to the district and federal governments? Ms. Failer?
Yes.
Mr. Arbach?
Yes.
Dr. Jones?
Yes.
And Ms. Beatty?
Yes, I am.
Let me see, what else do I want to ask? Conflict of interest. So several of you have been on the board. You have some experience with this. Ms. Failer, your testimony went into some detail about local projects you've worked on. Have you had conflicts of interest? And if you have had, what have you done? If there are conflicts of interest to come up, what will you do?
Yes, I have had occurrences of conflict of interest. And what I do in that case is I inform the chair that I'll be recusing myself from the case. I do not discuss the case with anybody else on the board. I will let staff know that I'm also recusing myself. Staff and the chair check to make sure that a quorum remains. With the activities of MOTA supporting appointees with the mayor's support, we have not had an issue in maintaining a quorum. And in the virtual meetings, I listen, but I don't participate. And in real life meetings, I step out into the room away from the dais, so I'm not even present during the deliberation and discussion for the case.
Thank you. Mr. Arbach?
Yes, my response would be very similar to that of Ms. Failer's. It's infrequent, but it has happened. And I do notify staff and board members that I'm recusing. Similarly, when in person, leaving the room, or It hasn't happened during virtual to step out or remain silent during presentation, but should we still be virtual, I would follow that same practice.
Dr. Jones.
To date, I haven't had any conflicts of interest as I operate more in the education realm. So I haven't, but if something does present itself very much in the similar fashion that my other colleagues have done, I would recuse myself from the project.
And Ms. Beatty.
Well, clearly it sounds like there's an established practice for recusal. So first of all, obviously you disclose, that's the most important thing. And then I would follow the practice of recusal as mentioned by the other members of the board.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, I'm intrigued with some of the work you described in your testimony in other jurisdictions, some of the archaeological work. Can you just describe that a little bit more, but also has that helped you with your work on the Historic Preservation Review Board?
So I do quite a bit of work in Maryland. So yes, it does inform because it's historical archaeology. In addition to that, I also work on projects that are in the U.S. Virgin Islands as well. So one of my sites is a African-American enslavement site, and another one is a pre-contact with this, which is an indigenous site on island as well. So having all of that, I guess, archaeological in hands-on experience does inform what we're doing. For example, we did have a situation today where archaeology came up. So having that experience, having that knowledge, as most archaeologists should, does inform and help with decisions as it relates to listening in and making decisions around historic preservation for the city.
Thank you. And Mr. Auerbach, in your testimony, you said a couple of things, or in a couple of places you spoke to how population growth could affect how we're looking at historic preservation. I might be summarizing that incorrectly. Let me see, also the need for affordable housing could affect. Could you just say a little bit more about that?
Sure. The main point I was trying to make was that in the 1970s and into the 1980s, the district's population was shrinking. Neighborhoods were, in some cases, falling into decline. Yet organizations like the DC Preservation League and neighborhood groups took great pains to document and protect some of the built environment. And it's many of those assets today that make reborn neighborhoods great, but it's come at a cost in terms of housing affordability. And where the populations may have been in the 5 to 600,000 range then, we're in the upper 6 to 700,000 range now. And so there's a higher premium on the availability of housing, and particularly the availability of affordable housing. Many make the case that older buildings, because they're not upgraded to luxury apartment status, are affordable. And while that's true, it's simply a case of supply and demand. And, we've certainly had cases during my tenure where an architectural solution to concerns from a community might be to simply remove a floor from a building, or remove 2 floors. And over time, that can have an accretive negative effect on the supply of housing in the city. By law, we do not consider use. We are not the zoning commission. We are not BCA. So we look at the compatibility or the not incompatibility of a proposal that comes before us. And so we don't have a latitude to consider a larger proposal because its use is going to be for affordable housing. But because we have this pressure in our city, it opens a conversation that we have about values. not unlike the conversation we had about the values of sustainability and historic buildings that we had ongoing for over the last 10 years. This is a forefront conversation that I think policymakers like yourself should be aware of, that that there is pressure, and how we deal with that pressure on the board. We don't have a lot of tools at our disposal, but policymakers could certainly look at how we can address the affordable housing crisis and need for more affordable housing with the values that we all embrace with historic preservation.
Of course, it seems to me that the mayor's agent does provide a way of dealing with some of those policy issues outside of the Historic Preservation Review Board. But I'm also thinking, as I'm listening to you, about downtown. If I remember correctly, downtown has its own downtown historic district, and yet we've seen substantial redevelopment and even increased density within the downtown historic district, because the discussion from a historic preservation perspective is not about use, but about design. I said to provoke some discussion here.
Yeah, about compatibility. I mean, again, if it's depending on whether it's contributing or non-contributing, the test that we have as a board adjusts. But ultimately, our purview is the compatibility of a new development proposal or an infill or a redevelopment to the broader historic district and to the context of the architectural styles and other factors to that historic district. So, when you have underlying zoning that can allow for one thing and compatibility within a historic district that points potentially to a different solution, there becomes a little bit of a conflict. And you're absolutely right that the mayor's agent does provide a relief valve, an appellate process. But I think it's just an important issue that the council and the executive should be aware of, that it's something that the board wrestles with almost at every meeting.
Yeah, I can see that, and I appreciate that. And we do struggle with that as well. I'm just going to repeat that the thought that goes through my mind, it's most, what pertains most in the historic preservation area is design, because design you can achieve density with good design, or it can be horrible, and then everybody hates it. In a way, I think that what we get with the historic preservation law, besides preserving a lot of our built history, is a better designed city. That may not have been the primary intent of the Historic Preservation Act of 1978, but we end up with a better designed city, and I think that's good too. I feel like I have a question for Ms. Beatty based on your testimony, but I'm not sure I do. I really liked your testimony because you spoke with some energy about a perspective that we're increasingly sensitive to. I just want to acknowledge that because I think that could be important in the board's work. I think I have one last question, and maybe I asked this of the veteran members here, and that is, what role do you think community input or opinion should play in your deliberations? And I'll start with Ms. Failer.
I find the community input to be very valuable. I think that community members have a strong awareness of many things related to some of the significant elements of historic preservation, such as setting, community environment. We found that even in our newest historic districts, that community members know a lot about the history. There are some areas where we've expanded boundaries because the community members have brought additional awareness about significant historical events to the table. So it's very valuable and important to hear the testimony from local community members. We often actually encourage it. If a case comes and we see that there's some tension or there hasn't been an opportunity to really have that dialogue, it's not uncommon for the review board to ask the applicant to make the time to have that conversation and then return to the board after having had that conversation with the community, usually through the ANC.
Mr. Auerbach, would you add anything to that?
Sure. As usual, agree with everything Ms. Failer has articulated. I would simply add that the role that the community plays, we are a city comprised of neighborhoods, diverse neighborhoods across the city, diverse in the composition of the people who live there, diverse in terms of the housing and building stock, and diverse in terms of the stories that each community has to tell. So when we have new proposals, whether it's for a specific building or in the case of a historic district, hearing from the community about the stories they have to tell, what it's like to grow up there for very long time residents, it's all critically important for the fabric of the city to commemorate and celebrate the past that we have. I had been a volunteer with what had been known as the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., that had for decades been conducting oral histories. So I know that's not direct to engagement in terms of the way you're asking the question, but it's important that voices are heard and voices are commemorated and voices are preserved. As it relates to our work on the board, only the most uncontroversial cases are silent from the community. If there's sort of unanimity or most unanimity, we don't really hear from the public because they've been engaged and are behind it. And we do always ask the question, making sure that they're in touch with the ANC, making sure that directly impacted residents, neighbors have been contacted and engaged. So, that's something that has improved dramatically over my time on the board. The staff has done a great job of not only complying with the law, but exceeding what the law asks for. And so we welcome testimony. And as I put in my opening remarks, one good thing that came out of COVID is a digital platform to have the community be able to respond. So I think it's great that that more people can engage digitally where they have that opportunity. It doesn't replace face-to-face, but I think if there's a way, just like in our schools and in our workplaces, we've adapted to a hybrid model. I think that if there's a way we can make it work so that people can engage digitally in our meetings in addition to in person, I think that would be welcome. The more voices, the better.
Thank you. One last question, and it kind of touches on that. I think you heard the Preservation League testify. It doesn't like that when their presentations at your meetings that the video is turned off for all of the members. Can you do anything about that?
As a board member, we're not responsible for the platform. I think that would be a question for HPO staff and OP staff and OCTO. In terms of what platform they're using and what the capabilities are in terms of server bandwidth and other factors. As a board member, I certainly have no issue with being on camera during a meeting. And I doubt any of my colleagues would either.
Ms. Failer, do you want to add to that or?
Only that I do know, Chairman Mendelson, that DDOT does have video because I've gone before DDOT during this time on projects that I've been working on for public space. And when they have public space, they do have a platform that they use that does allow the video of the members of the board, as well as those testifying to be present, just like we are here now. So I guess it's a question to ask staff and OP, is there something that's limiting their platform from doing that? Maybe it's a bandwidth issue that they have, I don't know. But I find it valuable to see everybody. And I find it valuable to see the applicants as they're testifying as well. Sometimes it's difficult to know whether something, how they're feeling about something, if they're confused about what they might be saying. It's not uncommon for people to come before the review board not knowing about architecture or being a preservation specialist of any kind and feeling a little bit intimidated. And I think seeing face to face that we're there to listen and hear what they have to say, we want to help them work through it as staff has been helping them work through it, is really helpful. And seeing somebody helps that happen, I think, easier.
Would it be unfair if I asked if you could mention that maybe to the HPO staff about what DDOT does?
Sure, we'll talk to Mr. Calpot about that.
Thank you. I do not have any more questions for any of you. I want to note again, the record will close on July 8th at 5 p.m. I'm not asking any of you to submit anything additional, but if there is anything additional, then you have until July 8th. And it's not a guarantee, but we'll see if we can try to mark up your nominations before, meaning vote, present to the council for a vote, your nominations before the council goes on recess this summer. So I want to thank each of you. Thank you, Ms. Beatty, for your willingness to serve, and thank you, the others, for your service to date and willingness to continue serving. That's going to conclude this hearing. After I adjourn this hearing, I will pause a little bit, and then we have a third hearing to follow. So the time is now 1:58 in the afternoon, and this hearing is adjourned.